Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Free to Grow CFO podcast, where we dive deep into conversations about scaling a profitable D2C brand. I'm your host, Jon Blair, founder of Free to Grow CFO. We're the go-to outsourced finance and accounting firm for 8 and 9-figure D2C brands. And today I'm here having quite the timely conversation with my friend Izzy Rosenzweig, founder and CEO of Portless. Izzy, how are you, man?
Doing good. I say it's definitely been a fun couple weeks, not boring. I can't say
Yeah.
it's good for the economy, but definitely not a boring couple weeks. Doing good. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Depending on when you're listening to this episode, what we're referring to, let's see, today, as of this recording, it's April 7th, 2025, just days after, big announcement of a bunch of big sweeping Trump tariffs that have been enacted. There's been several, actually enacted changes over the last several days, and then there's a lot of confusion about what is in place, what isn't in place, when does it happen, right? And so we're definitely going to get into some of that stuff today. But the reason why I mentioned this is so timely, Izzy and I had this interview scheduled many weeks back before this was all going on. And this couldn't be a better time to bring Izzy on, given his background and what he's doing over at Portless. So, with that being said, Izzy, before we get into the meat of the conversation, run the audience through your background, your journey to founding Portless, and what you guys are doing over there.
Absolutely. So I ran a consumer business for over 10 years, and I ran almost all of those 10 years, I ran it through the cross-border model. So people might be familiar with the cross-border de minimis model. There's a few ways to run the de minimis model. You can run it through Mexico, Canada. The other popular one is directly from China. So I ran it directly from China for the last 10 years. That model is essentially, instead of manufacturing your goods, putting on a boat, waiting 2 months to get it, finally getting it, paying import tax at the port day one, then selling your goods and shipping your goods on the 4 to 7 average delivery time frame across the states, we take a different path. We say, instead of putting in a boat, send it to our facilities. We have 2 in China, 1 in Vietnam. We'll probably get it 1 to 2 days post-production. Then you could start selling your orders. We have, Shopify integrations or integrations with any tech stack you're on, ERPs. And you'll sell the order. We'll pick pack either in a custom poly bag or a non-branded poly bag. We'll have a last mile carrier on it, think USPS, on track, LSO, things like that. And we'll deliver the goods on average of 6 to 7 days across the United States. The customer gets a tracking number within 24 hours. They'll have, anywhere from 5 to 7 days later, their local driver drop it off at their front door, a 100% local DTC experience. But the brand just went from, cash conversion cycles that were terrible, that were months later, to now days post-production, getting cash out inventory, but it also means you could restock. So if you're seeing good sales data on one of your on a best-selling item during Christmas season, let's say November, go back into production. You can still catch Christmas season. So the idea of going out of stock is a thing of the past. Amazing cash flow, game changing from a cash flow perspective. Again, months lead time to days, and many other advantages. So that's how I built the consumer business. Over the last 3 years, we actually shifted the consumer business to a B2B business. We no longer run a consumer business, but all what we do is we empower American brands to leverage the same model. So if you're an American brand doing, 8, 9 figures, we could support you. You could go from a cash flow, which is, again, months to days. Your customer gets the same local experience, but now you're a way more agile business. So that's what Portless does. We work with many different D2C brands, hundreds of D2C brands, and they can leverage this direct model where consumer gets the same experience as they has yesterday, but the brand has an extremely strong edge when it comes to cash flow, tax deferment in the new world, and agile inventory.
Okay, so there's a lot that I want to unpack there. That's a great introduction to our discussion, because so when you're first walking through that fulfillment model, right, you were referring to de minimis.
Yes.
A lot of the brands that we work with, there's definitely a handful that moved their fulfillment to Mexico or were fulfilling direct from China, to take advantage of this de minimis exemption. Some of you listening probably have heard this referred to as Section 321, right? Can you walk everyone through, before Trump changed things recently, what was that exemption and why does that enable this cross-border model or fulfilling direct from another country?
Absolutely. To give the high level, Section 321 is a law that is almost 100 years old. It says any package, again, the value of the package changed over time, but any package since 2016 that is worth under $800 retail value comes into the country import duty free. It is not a loophole. It is the law or was the law, or it still is law today, actually, of the United States of America, which means you can ship a package, the consumer gets it, and you don't have to pay import tax. Now, under Section 321, there's many different components. There's two that are important. One, de minimis, which is the law around anything under $8 is import duty free. And then there's the method of clearance, which is called Type 86. Type 86 is the method where you get into the country, you give certain data points. In the early days, there wasn't that many data points. They asked for more data points over time. But method of into the country, Type 86, under de minimis, no import duties. Those are the two things that really matter to a lot of people. Now, it actually started before Trump. It started with Biden. Biden in September announced, we plan to remove de minimis because we don't like Shein and we don't like Temu. Easy, Chinese-owned companies, fastest growing companies in the history of commerce because of this model, but not because of the taxes. And we'll get into the details. But either way, Biden says we're going to remove it. Now, Biden followed the traditional path of removing any taxes through Congress. You cannot just remove import tax because you want to, with one exception, Emergency Act. But Biden wasn't taking the Emergency Act path. He was saying, I want to go to Congress. We're going to give a 60-day comment period. And it would probably have taken 6 to 9 months to remove it. But there was guidance that was being removed. Trump got into office and says, no, I'm not waiting that long. I am enacting an emergency act. It was the IEPA Emergency Act, and saying, and that is the only exemption to skip Congress. And
Interesting.
what did he tie the emergency to? Well, fentanyl. Fentanyl is horrible. Everyone agrees it's horrible. But he used fentanyl to give the emergency act not only on China, which is probably the worst part of the whole thing, but also to Canada and Mexico. And Canada probably has their issues on fentanyl is probably a fraction.
Yeah.
Like, is it really emergency? Probably not. But either way, it was enough of a legal emergency to say, I do not need to wait for Congress. I am taking it away. So he took it away on February 5th. But what happened was, so then the model moved to a different model. I'll just quickly, before I talk about where the model moved, just kind of give the flow what happened. Quickly, the CP was not ready for this new model, which we'll talk about in a second. And on February 9th, Trump said, we're going to bring back de minimis until the CP is ready. Interesting enough, it got posted on February 9th, but it was officially back on the 7th. So, funny timelines across the board. But that is what was existing. So we knew it was going away since September. He sped up the process and he brought it back until CP is ready. And now he's removing it again on May 2nd. Now, let's talk about where the model's going. The model's going, if you remember, under Section 321, there's de minimis and Type 86. So the law of under $800, but also the method of entering the country. Type 86 has no way to pay import duties. It is not built for an import duty paying mechanism. There's two other main ways of entering the country. It's called a Type 11 and a Type 01. These are the type of customs clearance into the country that have more data, the HS codes, descriptors, and more on your raw materials and transaction value. More data, in brackets, helps fight fentanyl, which is a great thing, and also has the ability to pay import duties. Type 01, every Maersk ship that comes across the shipping ports is using usually a Type 01, but if the value of goods is under $2,500 value of transaction value, you actually go under Type 11, which is easier and a little faster. One other side note, Type 11, if your goods are under Section 301 from China, it actually goes down to $250 maximum. But either way, Type 11 and Type 1 is very traditional method of CBP. And it's the method shipping containers use. So we, since September, out of China, have been ready doing experiments with Type 1 and Type 11, and it works excellent.
I saw your LinkedIn post about it. I watched your videos of you talking through this stuff. It's fascinating.
It's really just different entry. So you need to have better data. So if you're a team, you probably have no data, which is, they got to get their act together. But we only work with American brands and let's say European brands. So just have very clear data, understand their factories, understand their supply chain. So we have all the clean data. We've been using Type 11, Type 1. They both work really, really well. The model's moving towards more of a Type 11. And the fundamental difference between pre and post, could you pay import taxes? And at Type 11, you could. As Portless, as the facilitator of moving goods, we lay it out and we invoice our customers accordingly. Prices doesn't change in our model. It's simply you must start paying import tax. So that is the high level. Now, I'll throw in Mexico and Canada a little bit. Mexico had its own problem where the president of Mexico said, I am done being the warehouse of the United States. Because people would basically boat in a free trade zone in Tijuana, store the goods, and do Section 321 in the United States. What the President Sheinbaum wants is, I want to manufacture. So you may have seen data points. Mexico is, one of the highest parcel of trade with like apparel. They weren't manufacturing in Mexico. They were bringing it from China and Vietnam.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she wanted to say, I don't want it into the country. So there's two parts. She says, you want to come to the United States, go Section 321, pay me import tax. That no free trade zone for you guys. So that was the Mexico problem. Canada didn't have that, but Canada was still able to leverage Section 321. So, but either way, in the world where Section 321 goes, there's less of a value in Mexico and Canada. There still is value. There's still tax deferment, but you still have that 2-month lead time, right? So, again, the whole model is moving towards a Type 11 model. Type 11/Type 1, Type 11 being the main model. And you can no longer avoid taxes. You're going to have to pay your tax, but at least you only pay your tax after you already sold the goods to your customer in our model. So A, we're right near a factory, you can be more agile with inventory. You could get an order. You don't need to pay. You're sitting in our facilities, not paying import tax. Only when you got the order, collect the money, and then you ship it. Then you're paying import tax at entry.
Okay, let's break this down really quick because this is fascinating. This is something that we've been talking about with several of our clients who were leveraging the de minimis, exemption from within Section 321. So let's talk about the taxes, and I'll break this down for the audience to understand here. What Izzy is saying is that the not loophole, it was legal, but the ability to not pay import tax on goods that had a retail value of less than $100 or $800, that's been closed or removed for now, right? But let's differentiate two different scenarios. One is the scenario where you put all your goods that are made in China into a container, right? You ship them to the US, you store them in a 3PL at the US. That's scenario one. Scenario two is you use a service like Portless, your product gets made in China, it stays in a warehouse in China, and it gets shipped as orders get fulfilled direct to the consumer, right? You're still paying import taxes in scenario one and two. But in scenario one, let's say you've got 10,000 units, you're paying the per unit import tax times 10,000 units just to get the goods in. So by the time they're at your warehouse, you have been billed for and paid import taxes on all product that you're holding. What Izzy is saying is if you fulfill direct to consumer straight from, say, a Portless warehouse that's in China, you're paying it one unit at a time or one order at a time, right? As that single order gets imported into the US. And so if you think about the cash flow impact, right, on the US fulfillment scenario one, you're actually hanging up thousands of dollars on the balance sheet, right, that you've paid in import duties that are sitting in that unsold inventory. Whereas if you're doing the portless model, the cross-border model, you've taken the order on Shopify, you've collected the cash, right? And so you actually have cash from a customer order to pay that single order's worth of import taxes. Do I have that right, Izzy?
You nailed it. And these numbers are crazy because you think about the tariffs he announced on April 2nd, it was 34% on top of 20% on top of Section 301 on top of traditional import tax. So we know a brand that was about to put about 400 grand on the boat. They would have had to come up about because they were close to 80% import tax. They were going to have to come up with $300,000. They didn't count for it. And not only that, so there's tax deferment, but then there's always excess inventory that you liquidate or you try to ship to other countries around the world. Well, you paid import tax on that. Now what? That's going to hit your
Yeah, and you're not getting it
your bottom
reimbursed.
line.
You're not getting it reimbursed when it leaves the country, you know.
You could do it, by the way. It is complex. But in this
I
model,
know some people who have done it, and they end up having to hire a service
yes,
to process it
exactly,
for you because it's so complicated, you
exactly.
know. Um, okay, so this is interesting, right? Because I think everyone is for sure super concerned about the P&L impact, which generally speaking, in this case, we are talking about the per unit landed cost increase of these additional tariffs. And don't get me wrong, that's a significant impact. But what Izzy's laying out here is that you actually have to think about the P&L and the balance sheet, right? And this tax deferment kind of aspect to all this, that's a balance sheet. That's a balance sheet management
Yep.
tactic. Now, it's super important because in both of those scenarios I just laid out, the P&L impact is generally about the same. It might be slightly different because of the, you've got to actually move it twice. You've got to do inbound freight to get to your US 3PL and then the outbound freight. So we have to consider that as well. But if we just remove the freight for a second and we just talk about the duties impact, there's a much bigger hit to the balance sheet when you're buying big lots of inventory, importing them, paying the taxes all at once upon import, and then those taxes are sitting on your balance sheet in the form of inventory that hasn't moved yet, right? Let's talk a little bit. I'm curious about the shipping cost, right? So if we sit down and we kind of compare, and I know it depends on, like brand specific and product category, but what do you generally see if you to compare the two scenarios? Scenario one is just one outbound freight cost that basically goes from your 3PL directly to the consumer, and then maybe a small inbound freight cost because it's a domestic move from the factory to your 3PL. Comparing that to scenario two, which is like a much larger inbound freight cost because you're importing it, you're sending it over on a boat or even air shipping it to the US, and then you're fulfilling it again out of your 3PL. What are you guys seeing when you're talking to prospects or clients, when they're analyzing those two scenarios? How is that playing into these decisions?
Yeah. So let's move into P&L. I want to answer this question, then I want to wrap up the de minimis because there's one area we didn't finish. But let's first answer this question specifically. Freight costs for most of our customers, our value lives in lighter weight goods. So think of apparel, shoes. We don't do fridges and we don't do furniture. Now, for the lightweight goods of our business, it's usually close to apples and apples. Sometimes we're cheaper. But how does that work? If you have an East Coast and West Coast, East Coast or West Coast, or East Coast and West Coast, you still have Zone 1 through Zone 8 through United States shipping zones, which means you're going to ship in New Jersey. If you're warehouse in New Jersey, you'll be cheaper, Zone 1. But if you're shipping it to San Diego, all of a sudden you're paying Zone 8. So you got shipping rates all across the board. You're going to have an average. In our model, we're always Zone 1, Zone 2. Because when we hand over through aircraft, we're handing it over 7 injection points: LA, Chicago, New York, Arizona, Texas, Miami, Atlanta, which means your rates are always on 1, Zone 2, never beyond that, or very rarely beyond that, very little. So those rates last mile were always much better. But then there's air cargo. Well, let's give an extreme example. If let's just say you're in the jewelry business, you're selling earrings, you can have 100,000 individual orders on a single pallet. And that flight is not to stop over into your US facility that has US OPEX and US labor. The flight is halfway to the customer's front door, right? So our shipping rate started under $5. We can ship a pair of earrings for about $4.90, door to door, customs clearance, everything baked in. But as the item gets bigger, then it gets more expensive. T-shirts, might be $6 with us. So Zone 1, Zone 2, last mile. You might find if your item is very light, you actually might find savings with us. If your item is in that apparel shoe space, you're probably looking apples pretty similar. So it's less of a P&L impact, but there's other ways to look at P&L. It's more about cash flow, lead time. So we would more say, how much excess inventory do you have? In our model, you should go from double digits to low single digits, which also the excess inventory also has a world of tariffs, which is also hitting your P&L, because now you're going to write off inventory, which you pay tariffs on. You're not getting that back. It's in your country. You're dumping or liquidating it. So that's on freight costs. I would argue most cases, most industries, pretty similar. Very light, cosmetics, jewelry, accessories, potentially even savings. Now, I want to go deeper into P&L, but I want to go back for a minute to de minimis. So de minimis is around until May 2nd. May 2nd is meant to be turned off only to China and Hong Kong. It is still open to Vietnam and every other country in the world. So right now, if you would ship a container out of Vietnam, you're going to have 43% port duties. But if you did de minimis with us, you have 0% port duties. And the direction is, it does plan to go away, but only when the CBP says it's ready, its systems are ready. Which begs the question, are the systems not ready? Which means you might see further delays come May 2nd, right? I'm not going to say, but it's either way. So, and to tie that to Mexico, Canada, if you have Vietnam product in Mexico, it still works until they take away Vietnam, right? So only China is being turned off on May 2nd. I don't care where you ship it from. I don't care if it's France or if it's from China or from wherever you ship it from, Mexico, Canada. China country of origin, where it's manufactured, and that's a whole other long discussion. What defines country? But let's say country of origin, where it's manufactured. That's what's being turned off. If it's manufactured in Vietnam, it is still operational. You can still do it until there's direction that you can't do it.
Interesting. That I did not know. And I think this is fascinating. This is exactly why I wanted to have you come on the show, because and like there's so much nuance, right? And unfortunately, brand founders being so busy, a lot of times they can only consume news headlines or, whatever information is in any given article that they stumble upon. There's a lot more nuance. Like, are there
Correct.
any other big misconceptions
Yes.
about de minimis or any of the other tariffs that you've seen get
There's
enacted
one other
or
side,
not enacted?
which I'm literally giving context to reporters so they get their stories accurate, but I don't blame it's so complex. You'll
Totally.
see in the fact sheet that says any um, any packages that's going through the postal system from Hong Kong or China is either 30% import duties or $25, whatever is greater. So people are like, oh, 1 second, $25 per shipment. That's not sustainable. It's through the postal system. The postal system is under the UPU, the United Postal Union. That is where if I was in Canada, I gave a package to Canada Post, it was delivered in the United States by USPS. That is country to country postal agreements. China and Hong Kong have Hong Kong Post and China Post. The early days of this model, de minimis, was actually built under the postal system. But in 2015, it actually shifted from the postal system because the postal system sucks. The second you're doing a government entity, it sucks. So it's
Yeah.
a 3-week delivery, and it was Mandarin everywhere. So, but the model we do is we do just like Maersk does shipping containers. We do air cargo. There's no difference. We enter the country through a Type 11 or a Type 01 or a Type 86. It is not the postal unit. We don't touch China Post. So there are noise about there about minimum $25. That is incorrect. It is under the de minimis. Almost nobody uses it. The only people that use it is bad actors. Why? Because the postal union has almost no data requirements. So you're shipping goods that need FDA requirement. The postal system doesn't care. You're shipping fentanyl, harder to find. So what that was trying to do is get rid of the post. You only should be shipping letter mail in the postal system. With de minimis, you're doing normal entry. You're just paying import duties, whatever you would have done by shipping container. That's another thing that people are getting wrong.
That's fascinating, man. So what are this is a loaded question, but let's just talk about some things that come to mind here. Like, given what you've laid out here, and obviously the deep understanding that you and your team at Portless have about the current situation, what are some of the high level recommendations that you recommend a brand either consider, like to just consider at this point?
Yes. Well, the one that we've had more inbound than we've ever had since founded the company. And this is baking into tax deferment from multiple ways. One, we talked about the balance sheet. You need cash to pay your employees and do marketing and do all that stuff. At a minimum, delay the taxes. Don't pay the tax until you collect money from the customer. But by the way, it also plays into the future wildcards. We hope this is all negotiation. But if you brought a container today, before negotiation has been finalized, you're not getting that money back. That was a legal tax requirement. It might land at 30%. It might land at 22%. We don't know. But don't expose yourself to all this day one needs to give up. At a minimum, have better balance sheet, better cash flow, and defer to hopefully what will be a settled wherever it may land. That's one. Two, um, this is a little more sophisticated for bigger brands, but there's something called the first sale law. The first sale law is quite complex, but I'll give a very basic example. People very often don't realize when you're paying your factory has two entities. They usually have one in China, one in Hong Kong. They do that because taxes is better in Hong Kong than China, which means there's different line items. In first sale law, both those entities are legal to make money, which means let's just say your factory had one entity and it charged you $10 and had a gross margin of 20%, and it did a little bit of marketing and it did a little bit of a couple other things. Well, in a first sale, but they also have a trade partner in Hong Kong. That factory is legally allowed to keep some of its profits in Hong Kong and some of its profits in China. It's legally allowed to have a marketing budget in Hong Kong, which means some of your baked-in COG of your $10 T-shirt is allowed to stay in Hong Kong. And the first sale law is you're allowed to pay transaction value on the $7. Let's say out of seven of your $10 T-shirt, there's 10% is gross margin that stays in Hong Kong. Another 10% is a marketing budget that stays in Hong Kong, then you're only paying transaction value on $7, not on 10. So whatever import duties is, it could reduce it by, let's say, 20, 30%. It is complex. You need to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Some of the big accounting firms and law firms can help you set it up. But if you're at enough level of scale, you could be saving millions of dollars by implementing something like a first sale structure. That is something, if you're big enough, talk to a trade lawyer. Even if you're decent sized, talk to a trade lawyer. Everything you do, you should be talking to trade lawyers now more than ever.
And those trade lawyers, look, they cost a pretty penny, but the good ones are good and they
They're
are
good.
worth their weight in
They're
gold. And
good.
that's another thing, because I've dealt with this before at Guardian Bikes. Do not cheap out on trade lawyers when you're looking into this stuff, because it's very
Because if you do it
complicated.
wrong, some people knock on your door and say, hey, is there arm's length? If it's not arm's length, how are you structuring the cost? What's the cost breakdown? It's not a problem. You just got to go deeper. And you have to, and very often factories won't share the line item cost with you. They want a third party. So you're going to look at, again, we've seen companies charge, let's say, $25,000 to $35,000 per factory, but you might be saving $1 million by doing
Totally.
first trade. So that is, again, if you're big enough, definitely look at that.
There's one other question I have that came up as you were talking, and this is something that one of our clients who was taking advantage of Section 321, fulfilling direct from Mexico, product made in China as apparel. They were confused about whether or not the import duties are going to now be calculated based on, so if they imported everything into a U.S. warehouse, they would pay the import duties at their cost, right? Whereas if they're fulfilling direct from Mexico, their assessment was that they would actually be paying duties at the retail value. How is that going to play out from your
I just did
understanding?
an hour webinar with SDNR, which is one of the largest law firms and the lawyers used to work the CBP. And if everyone wants, you go on our website, you can submit, and it talks about this exact question the lawyer answers in. I'll give you his answer. And of course, I encourage everyone to talk to their own trade lawyers. And there's a lot of noise on LinkedIn, but they're not trade lawyers.
Yeah,
That's just like,
yeah, for sure.
everyone's smart, but like to talk to
Yeah.
a trade lawyer. The guidance we are getting, it is on transaction value. And why people don't like the word COG. What's the definition of COG? Is it the cost of raw materials? Is the cost of raw materials plus the manufacturing? Does it include the marketing? Back to first sale discussion. Transaction value. CBP will knock on your door and say, show me your invoice on the import of record. On the Type 86, that was based off retail. In T11, T01, it's who's the import of record and what is your transaction value? In a first sale, it could be the invoice on the first sale between the factory and the second entity, not even the trade partner. What is your transaction invoice? Show me your invoice and show me your proof of payment. Those are the two most important things. So I'm not going to say the word COG because that confuses people.
Yeah.
It is transaction value, which is a legal term, which the trade lawyers and which our webinar, they talk about it very clearly. Show us the transaction value invoice, the invoice where you paid it. So it lets us argue it is definitely not retail. Is it COG? Well, what's your definition of COG? Are you
Yeah.
using for sale? You're not using for sale. So, of course, talk to a trade lawyer, but it's definitely not retail. So,
That's
transaction
interesting.
value, yes, it is. It is, let's say, closer to what you would expect on the word COG, but I don't want to use that word. I would use transaction value. Show me an
No,
invoice.
understood. Yeah, because cost of goods is it's an accounting term, and there's varying definitions, informal definitions of cost of goods sold, but the GAAP accounting, right, definition of cost of goods sold is landed cost, right, which is inclusive. Basically, it's the total cost of everything that it requires to get the good into saleable and fulfillable state, basically, and that includes receiving it inbound and to the final fulfillment location, right? And so that which I mean, when you're importing a container, it's not based on landed cost, right? You're actually duties are a part of the landed cost, and those are being assessed on a different
The
value, right?
lawyers are
So
like this. If you want to put a higher price, the CBP will gladly take it.
for sure.
There it is.
Yeah.
So speak to a trade lawyer. It's on transaction value, not COG. To your point, it's an accounting term, not a import definition term. It is the invoice you're paying for the goods from your supplier, from the buyer and the seller. Now, who's the
Fascinating.
seller? Are you doing for sale? You're not doing for sale. So yes, it is not retail because there was a lot of direction like that. And I'm not a lawyer, but we work with lawyers. You watch the webinar, you can hear it from the horse's mouth. It is not
Yeah.
your retail. Nowhere near it.
That's interesting. I definitely have a few clients to um, recommend maybe they check out that webinar. By the
100%.
way, if anyone's interested in that, do you know where that webinar is published?
It could be on our website already, portless.com. We have lots of blogs and we have podcasts. Let me
Okay,
find out.
we'll definitely direct people there for
Yeah.
sure. Because I mean, this is stuff that's changing right by the minute, and there's a couple things I want to touch on now. So I was managing the supply chain for Guardian Bikes, which during the last Trump tariffs that were enacted during his first term as presidency, and we were talking, Izzy and I were talking about before we hit record here that like the founders are and this is part of what makes them successful. They're very action oriented, right? They're very biased towards action, and like your gut reaction is to like take swift action immediately to offset these tariffs, but you have to do so in a smart manner. You've got to do your homework, and you really have to assess the total effort and the total cost of making a full supply chain or fulfillment network shift. I'm not saying not to do it. I'm saying to not take them lightly. At Guardian, during the first round of Trump tariffs several years ago, we actually chose not to leave China. And a bunch of our competitors did and went to less developed countries. And even though we're paying a higher, quote, landed cost, we just had more certainty in our supply chain. We were getting better quality. We were actually getting a steady flow of inventory. And we were actually able to gobble up some market share because some of our competitors stocked out because they were dealing with this lower cost but less reliable supply chain, right? So like that's one thing that I want to point out. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is like you've got brands now, like you mentioned, you guys have more inbound than you've had, ever since you started Portless because of what's going on. What are some of the major questions that you get from brands when they're trying to, effectively confirm that there's not going to be an issue from the customer experience standpoint if they move to a cross-border model with someone like Portless?
100%. The first thing we say is crawl, walk, run. Like any supply chain, to exactly what you're saying about your previous company, you know, experience it. So we send samples first. You get the experience. Then you start onboarding maybe a drop or a portion of your business. Try it out. We do this again. We've been doing this for 10 years. We do it for enterprise business and publicly traded, and we do it for 8, 9 figure brands all day. But you should get exposure. Expose yourself at a minimum. Expose yourself so you have another tool in your toolbox. Um, and then regards to diversifying supply chain, to your other point, I 1,000% agree with that. And actually, I would say most of the brands that we're engaging with are not doing any big shifts. The people that have over the last 5 to 10 years, look at where they are now. Like 43% out of Vietnam. That being said, will stay 43%? Probably not. I don't know. So even so, from a tax perspective, you may have not made the right move, but I do think from an ecosystem perspective, like what you said, is so underrated. And I'll give you an example in the apparel space. So we have customers in China, have customers in Vietnam. In the Vietnam ecosystem, it is good, not great. It is nowhere near China. From embroidery to even getting fabric. And one example is the fabric ecosystem in Vietnam does not match the output of Vietnam. So that means they say if you want to buy fabric from Vietnam, you have to order 400 rolls. But in China, you can order one roll. So if you want a
Yeah,
new collection, new design, then they're buying it from China, which means you have a 7 to 14-day delay of getting your fabric to your factory so you could do your new design and your new idea. Then once it's done, how many embroidery suppliers are there? How many zipper suppliers? How many button suppliers are there? So Vietnam is good. It's just nowhere near as sophisticated as China, or even the expertise. The cost of labor is cheaper, but you're not necessarily going to have the same output. So, like you said, just I don't know if we should make any huge changes today. Arguably, if you did it in the last little bit, I don't know if you're better off both on ecosystem efficiency or even what Trump is doing. But it's always good to have a plan in place. It just doesn't
totally.
always mean it's the better plan.
Well, and I think if I could sum up a lot of the discussion we've had here, it's that there's not a single factor that dictates you should take a specific action, right? Like I think the kind of prevailing emotional response is costs go up, like move supply chain, get costs down. That's a single factor, right? That's like making a brand feel like they should make a change. It's an important factor. Don't get that wrong, right? But you have to look at P&L considerations and balance sheet considerations, specifically not just cost of goods sold but cash flow, right? And what's really important in the DC world is customer experience, right? Customer experience is ultimately, I always say, like, you're not just selling a D2C product, you're creating a D2C brand, and brand implies repeat purchase, and repeat purchase implies relationship, and relationship implies an exceptional experience, right? And it's not all just cost. So when you have someone who's concerned about something coming direct from China, and I've heard this before, they're concerned about it looking like it's coming from China. Explain really quick the Portless process, which I think is great, of like how you provide that very domestic feeling experience to the consumer.
100%. Okay, so I'll give one example. This is a tracking number that a customer that we serviced got. They made the order on March 13th. It was delivered on the 19th. It's a USPS tracking number. It's a USPS label, and it was either a non-branded or branded packaging based on what the customer want. This is a typical supply chain experience. This is it.
Totally.
Local
Yeah, and what the
delivery,
origin looked like LA, right?
and the origin is LA, where we inject it.
Yeah, got it.
Because there is no scan. There was not a single thing of Mandarin. There's not a single thing of a tracking number outside of USPS. The scan, what the brands see the scan of our injection points. So they're like, okay, you have a hub in LA, you have a hub in Chicago, you have a hub in New York, a hub in Arizona, Texas, Miami, Atlanta. So it is 100% a local experience. And I built this because I built a brand, not a
Yeah.
business brand for 10 years.
So
So
you had to think about that firsthand.
I
What does
had
this
to
feel
think
like
about
to the
it. I'm not
consumer?
just a logistics provider. I was a brand builder, right? And I built the logistics off being a brand. And I 1,000% agree. If you can, and which is why this model, by the way, only got very efficient the last couple of years. If you go back when I started, it was under, like I said before, the UPU. The UPU, you couldn't, you saw a Mandarin and it was a 3-week delivery. That is unacceptable from an experience. But since 2016, I went to the direct injection model, where you're buying air cargo space, which means goods are in the United States within 24 hours, or could be with a plane. It could be 2-3 days, but you're also zone one the second it hands over. So 1,000%, the experience must feel 100% local. And I'll add to that, this is just US. We have a 5-day delivery to the United Kingdom. And back into the tariff world, we're seeing brands saying, you know what? We're going to lean into marketing spend to these other countries. Because there's de minimis in Australia, there's de minimis in Europe and in UK and Canada. So we're seeing brands with one hub in Portless. Sure, they're doing the US business because tax deferment and cash flow. But now you can spend your CPMs in cheaper countries. And you can start shipping it. It's $5 to Europe, it's $6 to Germany. There's a very big world out there. And what's happening now is brands are saying, I need to look at every single possible advantage I could have. So edges in many different areas. And I just got off a call right before this call with another brand. He says, they actually are excited for this because most of the competitors do not have operational excellence. But if you are a competitor and you're an entrepreneur and you could look at every single thing like, hey, it's for sale for me, maybe I'm too small, but maybe I could do tariff engineering. Tariff engineering, the example we give is there's a very big shoe company that adds fuzz or like a soft part of their sole to over 50%, which changed their classification from a shoe to a slipper, which went from 20% duties to 6% duties. So there's HS code. How good is your HS code? Is your HS code on a microwave where it should have been an air fryer? Well, that's a difference of 15%. Historically, your motor's just working, you're doing what you're doing. The operator's got to step up. You got to look at every single advantage you could possibly get from the balance sheet to the P&L. How can I run better cash flow? How can I at least tax deferment? Should I do business in other countries? As crazy as it sounds, it's easier to do business in other countries than it is in the States. We're in a wild place to say that, but that's what it is. Easier to do business in Europe than the United States. Insane. But facts, it is true. Then you can look at tariff engineering. You can look at de minimis, HS code recommendations, doing a project around that. There are things you could do to hit both your P&L efficiency, cash flow efficiency, and maybe think beyond the United States.
Bam, mic drop. I love this. Izzy, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're going to need to talk some more, I'm sure, at some point if you're up for it. Before we land the plane, no pun intended. No, that wasn't a Portless joke. Where can people find more information about you and Portless if they're interested in what we've been talking about here today?
Absolutely. I post a lot of content on LinkedIn. So every time something's happening, I'm posting about it. I'm posting our opinions. I'm posting, the conversation to have with trade lawyers. So I'm on LinkedIn at Izzy Rosenzweig. I'm on Twitter as well, or X at Izzy Rosenzweig. as well as Portless.com. We're constantly doing blogs. We're constantly doing webinars, like we just did with the trade lawyers. And our mission is to educate. There's lots of paths. You know, I'd like to think at a minimum in this world, you should expose yourself to all the different areas. Don't make any crazy bets, like move. I don't think you should move your supply chain overnight, but you should look at optimizations because
Totally.
that could be your edge against your competitors. And we still live in a
100%.
capitalistic world, and you should use every edge to outbeat your competitors.
Definitely check out Izzy's content. I'm not joking. I follow it myself. It's super informative. So definitely check that out. And don't forget, if you want more helpful tips on scaling a profit-focused D2C brand, consider following me, Jon Blair, on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in learning more about how Free to Grow's accountants and fractional CFOs can help your D2C brand increase profit and cash flow as you scale, check us out at freetogrowcfo.com. Izzy, thanks for joining, man, and look forward to chatting soon.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.